Hi you guys. So in this video I'm gonna assemble a Nissan A1400 engine. I've had the crank done, I've had the block rebored, I've had the cylinder done. It's gonna get a new oil pump, new water pump. It's actually a motor that I'm building to sell as an exchange unit. Anyway, this is how I do it. So here's just about everything. Here's the new pistons. They've been bought 20 thou. Had them fitted to the conrods. The conrods has been resized on all of them. Here's the crankshaft. The crankshaft was just polished. It's standard. So I'm going to put standard big ends and mains on. New oil chain, new oil filter, new water pump, new oil pump. All of that's going to go in. Here's the block. The block's been rebored 20 thou, but it now needs to go for cleaning. Whenever you have engineering done, especially on a block, you have to take high pressure air and blow everything out. I use a gun that I put fuel in, because you never know if the engineers actually clean it out properly. And the last thing that you want is to assemble an engine, start it up, and you've got debris in your oil that was hidden in your block in one of the oil ports or something. So first thing I'm going to do is clean this out properly. So the first thing that's got to go in is the cam followers. This is an extremely important item when you rebuild the engine. Every single thing that you put back in your block, you've got to oil. Because remember, it's bone dry. We've washed everything dry. So you have to put oil on it. Otherwise, with that first startup, you're going to have a problem. The cam followers go in those holes there. I'm going to drop all of them in quickly, and then I'll show you what it looks like afterwards. So I put a good amount of oil on the follower, and then I also squirt oil down the hole where it goes, and then you simply just put it in, and then it's in place. And then what I do is I just drop a little bit of oil on top of the follower, like that, and then you have to oil all the cam bearings. I've done all of that already. Now I can put the cam in. So the next thing that we have to do is to get the cam in place. And just like with everything, you need to properly oil all the lobes and all the bearing bits, because you remember, you're going to start this engine dry. It's going to take for a few seconds for the oil to get there. So you've got to oil everything. I've already oiled the bearings. And then just get the cam in place. Like that. Now we can get the retainer in place and torque it up. With the retainer plate, it's got a mark over there that says lower with a little arrow. That's obviously lower, so it means it goes on like that. But again, lots of oil, and then we can get the bolts in and torque it up. So next we have to put the crank in, and to do that we need to put in the main bearings. So there's a few bearings that's got an oil groove like this, the front one, and the oil groove bit with a hole always goes in the bottom. When you take them out the packet, they come in pairs, so try and keep them in those pairs. And then the second one, that's just a normal little bearing. You simply just slide them in like that. Make sure the hole lines up with the oil hole, otherwise your crank's not going to get oil. And then the thrust bearing also comes like that, one with a groove, one without the groove. The one without the groove obviously goes over there, and you slide them in. Then it gets a skinny bearing again without the hole. And then it gets a bigger bearing again at the back. That's got the groove. And now you've got to oil all of them. So what I like to do, and I know it oozes out eventually, when I oil them I like to pump a bit of oil in there, because your cam is now in and your oil will stay in those channels. So I like to try and fill up those channels before I actually put the crank in. So I've sprayed a lot of oil in there, but you've got to get this really wet with oil. And then once the crank's in, you will do the same thing. With your crank, when you get it back from the engineers, don't trust that it's all clean. You have to give it a good wash as well. I'm going to wash my crank quickly and then can put it in. Right. Crank is clean and we can put it in place. There we go. Beautiful. See, standard. Now, main bearing caps, and then we'll torque it up. So the main bearing caps are all numbered. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Obviously, that's the one that goes at the back, and that's the one that's in the front. And they've got to go in the sequence. A lot of main bearing caps got a little arrow on it to show you that it's front or that it's back. These don't, but I always line them like this, and then you see there's a punch mark at D and B. They've just got to be the same way. So obviously that one is now the wrong way around. So the numbers are all on one side like that, and that's the front of the engine over here, and they're just going to put them on the crank like that. Obviously I've now put the bearings in, and I'm going to oil them and then put them on, but I will keep them in the sequence like this, you know, otherwise you would don't want to get confused. So I'm going to oil them all now and put them on. One thing that I like to do with these little engines, it doesn't have a seal at the back of the crank. The oil seal just goes in there, but you can get a little seepage past there, because obviously there is no seal between there and between there and there. So I like to put a little bit of RTV on there, just a little bit, otherwise you might get a little bit of seepage on the oil. So I'm going to do that quickly and then put my main bearing caps in. I use this stuff, and it's literally just a little bit there and a little bit there. So now when you put the cap on, you know there's nothing that's going to seep past there. So I've put the main bearing caps on just without the bolts, just to make sure that it's all good. All my numbers are in the same place. That one can only go one way around. And I've put a lot of oil on the crank and a lot of oil on the inside of the bearings. So what I will do now is I'll put the bolts in and just tighten them up just a little bit by hand. And every time, once I've done one, give the crank a turn just to make sure that it's loose. Because one of them could be biting, you never know. I'm going to do that quickly. So just before you put these bolts in, just put a little bit of oil on the threads, just like that. Because you don't want this to be dry on the block. Because remember, you've now washed everything with petrol or diesel or whatever. You don't want this to be dry on the block when you torque it up. This could mess up your torque setting, because the thread could bite and you don't know about it. I noticed that one has got a little bit of gunk in the thread. I'm just going to clean it up. But yeah, top tip, just put a little bit of oil on the bolts. You must do that with all the bolts actually, except for once on the mains and on the conrods. You always put a little bit of, not all the other bolts. So I've set up my torque wrench, and I'm simply going to start in the front, do each one, and go through to the back and torque it up till it clicks. Then I'm going to do that with all of them. Once I'm done, I'm going to do a second run on it. I'm not going to bore you with all those details. I'm going to carry on and do that quickly. Next thing, to put the rings on the pistons. And again, what I like to do is to pack them out and have them number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, just like it's ready to go into my engine. 1, 2, 3, 4. And that way you don't get confused. There's also a little arrow on the piston there to show you that's the front. So that conrod will physically, the piston and conrod will physically go in like that. But that's, we'll sort it out in a sec. I'm gonna put the rings on here and then we'll start putting them in the block one by one. So okay, it's become time to put the rings on. They come, this make comes in a packet like that. That's the top ring, second ring and the oil ring. I've put those 3 on already, so I'm going to do this one. And it's actually quite simple. This ring, the oil scraper comes in 3 parts and it's got a little slider pin there that allows you to get it over the piston, so you don't stretch it. So I like to put the one joint, if you can call it, there, the other one there, and the other one there. More or less, I like to do that. So that one is now there, so I'm going to put this one, and you simply just twist it like that. Twist it and then you roll it in. And then over here, you hold it with your finger and you slip it in. Now it won't be 100% in place now because it's not a complete ring yet, so you've got to put the other part on. I'm going to put that over here. And again, just twist it and get it in there and then slide it around. It'll just run around. Now that it's in, you can start moving and maneuvering it like that so that it goes in everywhere and it starts forming a ring, because it's got to be in like that so you can squeeze it with a ring squeezer and get it into the cylinder bore. So that's the oil scraper done. So okay, now the second ring's got to go on. You probably won't be able to see, but there's a little chamfer on there. That's got a little chamfer. That's got a little chamfer like that. And that little chamfer goes to the top. And just like with the other ring, you hold it like that and you twist it and you get that in the groove, put your thumb on it, and then you've got to take the rest and slide it in, and then your ring is in place like that. It's a bit of a trick. You get a pliers for it. I've never used the pliers. I've always done it like that, and it works for me. So when you install any ring into any cylinder, these are new pistons and new rings, but they're not from the same manufacturer. It's a good idea to just put the ring in there and just make sure it doesn't have excessive play. With all these rings that you get, there is a little guide to tell you what to do and how to do it. Just follow that guide. And some of the rings has got a dot that tells you the top. Some of them are actually punched top, like this one. It's punched top. Probably can't see it, but over there it says top. And then the same, you just squeeze it like that, get it in, get your thumb on it, and then slide it in like that. Make sure you don't scrape your ring over there, your piston over there, and that's it. Job done. So next is to put in the big ends. These conrods has got a little oil hole, but the bearing and the conrod has got that little notch, so you can't put it in the wrong way around. And the easiest is to put a little notch in there and then squeeze it in, and that's that done. And then with the other half of the bearing, it's the same. It's got that little notch. Put it in there, squeeze it in, job done. So now putting on the ring squeezer, it's actually quite simple. Make sure all your rings are more or less halfway in, and the joints apart. You don't want the where the rings come together to be in the same place. So like a split the oil ring as well. Everything wet with oil, and then you simply put your ring squeezer over. I like to do this in the vise, but I'm going to do this the old school way. And then you simply start tightening, and as you tighten, just make sure that you're not pinching any of the rings. Tighten again, look to see that you're not pinching any of the rings. You'll realize soon enough if you're pinching one of the rings, and then give it a nice tight turn. Now what's important, you must line up your ring squeezer. Sometimes the plate on the ring squeezer don't line up, and it's going to give you a problem when you put it in a barrel. So just take your hammer, give it a little tap like that, just so that the plate of the ring squeezer lines up. And that's it. Now I'm going to put it in the block. So I've already put in number 4, and the crank journal is on the top. So when I swing this over, I'll put the bearing caps on. I'm going to now do number 1. You've got to look at your little arrow to make sure that it shows forward, and also make sure that you are busy with number 1. That's number 1. Plenty oil, plenty oil. Just going to add a little bit of more oil here. You can never have too much oil. And just the last confirm, arrow to the front. Slide it in. And now with a little bit of luck and a little bit of prayers, this will go in. Done. So with the conrods down in the bottom position, I put the caps on and just tighten them by hand, and then turn them to the bottom position just to make sure that I've got the right caps on the right numbers. And you have to always check that, and I can see that I do. See there, both number 4, and in the front both number 1. It's important because there are some engines where you can't put the conrods, they're not all same side, like in the Alpha for argument's sake. They swerve to the one side. So, and in a V8 Chevy, so you've got to put the right conrod in the right place, otherwise you're going to have a lot of wear and tear over there, and you're going to have no side play like that. So it's important to have your side play like that. But yeah, that's it. I'm going to do the other 2 quickly, then the pistons are in. So okay, all 4 pistons are in, and I've checked clearance on them like that. Can't really see it. There must always be a little bit of clearance on them, and you can see on that little badge there and the one down there that these are also, every other conrod is the other way around, and that's how it's supposed to be. But it's important that you have your 1, 2, 3, 4 on the sides, and it's 1, 4, 4, 3, 3, 2, 2, 1, and otherwise you've got your caps on the wrong way around as well. So I've checked all of that is good. Torque wrench on it, and we can start with the timing on the front. So I like to torque everything twice to make sure, number 1, I haven't missed anything, and just to make sure that it's all done properly. So I've gone over the first time, torque wrench is set on the correct setting. This is now my second run, and all of them will probably just click. There we go. There we go. And so I will do all of them. I'm happy with that. So the next thing we have to do is the timing. And you have to get the engine on TDC, and you have to get your cam on top on Rockfall. I'll show you that in a sec. So TDC you can do in many ways. You can put your timing cover on and put your pulley on and see where the timing marks is and get it on 0 and remove everything again. That's the easiest way to do. You can also, if you're careful, you can actually feel it with your finger. Or you use a clock gauge. So that's now on TDC. So if you go that way, needle goes down. Go the other way, needle goes down. So it means that there is TDC. Now we have to find the correct position for the camshaft. So I call it top 1 rock 4. So you need to fire on cylinder 1, which means on a 4-cylinder, cylinder 4 then has to be on the exhaust inlet stroke. So you put 2 push rods in and you turn your cam and you'll see that's where that happens. See there? Right there. So that cam moves that push rod up, the lobe. That lobe moves that one up, so it's right there. But there's a timing mark for that. But I just wanted to show you that you know you're in the right position. So if you put these 2 push rods on number 1, that what's happened there won't happen. So now it's on top 1 rock 4. So now we can go ahead with the timing. So what you've achieved now is, without looking at any timing marks, you've actually lined up the cam and the crank so that your timing would be in the correct position. But to just confirm, there's a little dot there, and there's a little dot there, and that dot and that dot, the center of that bolt and the center of that bolt has to line up. You just use a straight edge for that, and they have to just line up like that. And once they line up like that, your timing is done. You can then put your timing chain on and away you go. So I've got the chain on and I've taken the liberty of putting the tensioner in. And you can see my lines all line up properly. There is another way of doing it, by counting the dots from that chain link to that chain link. It has to be on your timing marks. I've got a video on YouTube showing how to do that. I'm not gonna do that in this video, but that's the easiest way to do it. But I wanted to show you this way so that you understand how the timing works. So now you've got to torque that bolt and torque those 2, then we can put the timing cover on. Don't forget the splash plate over there, but I'll show you that in a sec. So okay, with everything all torqued up, it's time to put the timing cover and the gasket on. So what I do for the gasket for there, I put the sealant on the back of the gasket. That way I don't smear my engine full of sealer, and you only need a thin little line of it. And then you put it on. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to put gasket sealer on the other side on the back side of the gasket, the cover, and not on the gasket. That way it just looks a little neater. Those will obviously cut off once everything is in place. So I'm going to do the back side. Remember to put your keyway in and your plate. I'm going to put the keyway in there, tap the oil seal into the cover, and then put sealant on the cover, and then that bit is done. So with any oil seal, 9 times out of 10 you can push it in by hand, but what's important is that you oil the surfaces where they go in, and obviously the outside of the oil seal. And then like I say, 9 times out of 10, if you have it nice and straight, it'll just squeeze in like that. Home, done. So next we simply put the cover on. and screw it up. And while we're at it, we're going to do the same with the water pump. Screw it up, then tighten all those bolts together. I'm not going to record the water pump bit, it's the same as this. So the next thing, when you see the engine, it will be upside down, so that we can do the sump and the oil pickup. So next I'm going to put the oil pump on. Something to look for. Make sure that the pipe inside doesn't quite touch this little sieve. Otherwise you're only letting a small little hole to sieve, to filter the oil. If in case there's any debris in your engine or sludge or whatever, this little filter is made to filter that before it goes to the pump. It's just to protect your oil pump. So make sure there's a little gap there. And then of course a little bit of gasket sealer on both sides, and then we're going to screw it on. So the gasket sealer on that gasket has got to be so little, it shouldn't actually even squeeze out. Otherwise you're going to get those bits of sealer inside your oil, and it could block some of your oil ports. That's quite important. So next thing, we're going to look at the sump, and we're going to install the sump. But before we install it, also very important, a lot of guys, when they take an engine out of a vehicle, they put it down on the floor, on the sump. And 9 times out of 10, the sump dents in. This one was actually badly dented. You can see on the marks there how I've panel beated it. And what happens when this dents in, there's not enough space between the bottom of the sump and your oil pickup. And that will cause your oil pump to starve of oil. And it might be just enough that your oil light goes off, but there's not quite enough pressure to save your engine, especially at high revs. So it's quite important to make sure that your sump is nice and round like that, like this one. And another thing, make sure that those holes, sometimes the guys over tighten them, that isn't bent through. I'll show you on the other side now. So sometimes the guys over tighten the sump, and these bits here where the holes are, they actually pull, and they become protruded like that. You'll have to then knock them back with a round ball hammer. So I've done this one already. That's all sorted. So now we can put the sealer on. So your sump gasket comes in 4 bits. Those 2 are made out of cork, and these 2 are made out of rubber. And there's a bigger one and a smaller one, and a left side and a right side. So you can put them on like that. I wouldn't advise that. I always put a small little bit of sealer on the engine, and then put the gasket on, and then put the sump on after that. I'm not gonna record all of that. It's quite boring, but I'll show you once I've done a little bit, and then screw it on. So you just need a small little layer of gasket maker there, and then it's important to get some into the corner and a little bit around there, and the same on the other side. And then you can, once you've done that, you can fit your gaskets in. Make sure everything is clean and dry as well. But this little bit is enough, because the cork gasket will do its thing. Just make sure if there's any gaps where you cut the gasket off, you've got a little bit of sealer there. But like that, that's perfect. So once you've put your sealer on, it's important that you see a little bit of sealer come out the bottom. And I'm going to put more sealer on those corners there, because that's where it usually leaks. And then a little bit more sealer on top here. You actually don't need sealer there. But yeah, rather be safe than sorry. But I'll show you that in a second. So I've got both the front and the back in. Put a little bit of sealer there and all around, and then time for the sump to go on. So once all the gaskets are in, you're now going to put all the bolts in by hand. You can see there's still a gap, and the gasket is still loose, because now it's time to pull the gasket slowly. And you want to do it equally, otherwise you could pop out these seals over there. I'm going to get my tool and start with that. So okay, you can now slowly start pulling this together, going from side to side, and then obviously to the back. and while you do it, make sure your gaskets and everything stay in place. And then you can start doing all the ones in between. Just until you feel they're touching. Remember, we're not squeezing the gasket now. And we do a few this side. So we just want the screw to touch. The sump isn't actually touching the gasket yet. Over here. So we want to slowly pull it together without over tightening any one of them. It's not even touching. That gasket is still loose. That's now touching. That's now touching. And that's it. You can see I'm only using a small little T-bar. That's how tight you want to do it. You just want to see your sealer touch the gasket and that you're pinching your gasket only a little bit. You can see my gasket sealer coming out there. All around. And that's it really. See there? I know this is not going to leak at all. %. So next to go on is the cylinder head. So I took it to our local engineering works. They are specialists in cylinder heads. And you can see there, that's cylinder number 1, exhaust valve number 1, and inlet valve number 1. So they grind it accordingly and then install it accordingly. And that way you know everything is going to seal perfectly. They also skimmed it. So this is the other side of the right side of the cylinder head. So my cylinder head guy, he sandblasts all his cylinder heads that he does, every single one. And then this is obviously got the valves were done. It's got 4 new exhaust valve guides in because they were not too well. The inlets are perfect, and then it's got the Victor Ryan's valve stem seals on. So next I'm going to put this on the engine. So before you put it on the engine, make sure you've got those 2 guides there, that one and the other one, and your gasket can only go on one way. So next, the cylinder head. So with the cylinder head bolts, remember there's one longer one that goes in the middle on the distributor side of the engine. Clean them all nicely, especially the threads with a wire brush. And then as with any bolt that you're going to torque, a little bit of oil on the threads. Last thing you want is for it to be dry when you torque it up, because then you're going to get a wrong torque setting. So oil up all of them, and then we're going to whack them in and torque them up. So when you torque a cylinder head, you literally iron it out to the sides. So you start in the middle, and you always go across like that. You always form across when you do it. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And I like to do it twice, and you can even do it 3 times. It doesn't matter. The more you do it, the better. In case you miss one, or in case there's a bolt that's now settled and it hasn't found its spot yet. So if you do it a 3rd time, nothing wrong with that. So, but always across form. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Simple. So when you put the bolts in, it's a good idea to turn them by hand, and they should turn in all the way freely. If not, you've got a problem with the hole. But remember, we cleaned the holes in the beginning. So they should all turn in freely. Number 1, the hole is now clean, and number 2, we've got oil on the threads. So they shouldn't turn difficult at all. If you do, there's something wrong. So next we're going to tighten them up a little bit, and then we'll start the torquing procedure. There we are. So usually when I torque a cylinder head, I like to go half of what it's supposed to be, just to get the head in place. So this is literally half of what it's meant to be. And then I'm going to do it, remember your cross, and then I'm going to do it what it's supposed to do, to be twice. So this is just the first strike, or the first stroke, or the first iron out of the cylinder head, only on half of what it's supposed to be. And then the second and third time it will be what it says in the book. So this is now what it says in the book, how it's supposed to be taught. And then I'm going to do it again. See what I mean? Done. So now we have something that's starting to look like an engine. Next we have to put the rockers on. And before we do that, we have to put in the push rods. Naturally there's 8 of them. And I missed one there. And it also won't hurt to just pop a little bit of oil down there, just like that. Because remember, when you start up this engine the first time, it's going to be dry. The only lubrication that it'll have is the lubrication that we've put on the bearings and on the pistons and on the rings and everything. So a little bit of extra oil always helps. So I'm busy putting the rocker shaft on. When you put it in, make sure that your tappets are all rocked to the back, because they can push on the top of your push rod, and it can potentially, depending on the position that your cam is in, you can potentially damage the valve. See, here's another one. So always make sure that they rocked in at the back before you tighten those screws. And there's a torque setting for them. And like with anything else, you put a little bit of oil on the threads before you put them in. So I'm just going to tighten those quickly, and then we can look at the valve clearance. So the next thing I want to do is to put the crank pulley on. But I've noticed it doesn't have score marks, but it's not too smooth. It's like it's run dry at some point. And to sort that out, all you do is to take a little bit of, this is just normal 600 paper. Just take your 600 paper like that. And just rub it a bit. And then it looks like that. And that's all good to put in. before I push it past the oil seal, I want to put a little oil on there, like you do with everything else. Just a little bit of oil. Otherwise it will hook on the oil seal. And now it'll just tap it gently. And you can pull the rest with a nut if you want. But that's it done. Later on we'll give that a torque. But that's it for the crank pulley done. And see, we're perfectly on zero. So next thing we have to do is set the valve clearance. So generally what you do when number 1 is on fire, number 4 is on exhaust inlet stroke, in other words on rock. So you'll set number 1 valve clearance and then turn the engine, and then when number 4 is on compression, when number 1 is on compression, number 4 will be on rock. So when number 4 is on rock, number 1 will be compression, you set that one. So you always set the one that's on compression stroke, because then both valves are closed. So the valve clearance is hot 0.35. I nearly made it way too big. So that's a 0.35. And you put it in and just turn it close. I've undone all of them. You just turn it till it just pinches it like that. And then you tighten that with your number 12. According to my book, exhaust and inlet are the same. And you just nip that up. So that would be an inlet. And next we will do the exhaust. Same story. Make sure there's a clearance. Turn it like that. And that's it. Then we're going to tighten that up with the number 12. I'll do a separate video on valve clearance, but that's the basics of it. So now I will turn the crank till number 4 is on compression. This will be on rock, and then I'll adjust number 4, and so on. So I'm done with the valve clearance. I'm gonna turn the engine till it's on rock, top on rock 4 again. Make sure it's on 1 TDC. That'll just help me to put the distributor, the spark timing in. But what I'm going to do in the meantime, I just put this a valve cover on, because I don't want any dust or debris to go in there. I'm not putting any sealer on, because I'm going to take it off again once the engine is hot to do the valve clearance proper. And what I'm also going to do is just cover this with a little bit of tape to prevent anything or any insects or whatever to go in there. After that, next I'm gonna fit the oil pump and close up the fuel pump hole, but I'll show you that in a sec. So next I'm gonna install the oil pump. I usually put the gasket on dry, and the reason for that is I don't want any sealer in there. It's going to ooze out and it's going to go straight into my oil lines. So, and they do give you a thicker gasket for that. So they usually don't leak, and it won't leak. But also remember, this oil pump is bone dry. So I'm going to put a bit of oil on the gear, and then bolt it on, and then I'm going to pump a little bit of oil into it. But I'll show you that in a sec. So with the pump just sitting like that, I just want to get a little bit of oil on the gears. So I'm just going to pump some oil in there, just so that it works through. You can now hear there's oil on the gears. It just makes it so much easier to prime the oil when you start the engine for the first time. You can hear there's proper oil in that little pump now. And you see how much oil I've squirted in there. And it doesn't, now it's only coming out on the other side. See there? Whoops. It's only now coming out on that side. So I've put quite a bit of oil in there. Now I know at least the gears are wet. So we've got a chance of bleeding it through very quickly. But there's another trick, I'll show you that in a sec. So for any service that you do on any motor car where the oil filter sits like that, don't ever put that oil filter on dry. Just see how much oil goes in here. And you can imagine how long the engine has to run before this filter is full of oil. So now we've primed the pump a little bit. It's not dry. There's oil in it. And we're filling this with oil. And we're going to screw it on. And then when we crank it up to start it the first time, we're not going to start it. We're going to crank it with a starter motor until there's oil pressure. And that's the right way to do it. Because then there's no combustion on the pistons and you're not going to damage your bearings. Look at all that oil it takes. This is the best thing that you can do for any engine rebuild. Probably the best advice anybody can ever give you on an engine rebuild. Look at that. And of course, just wet the seal. Now that's full of oil. We're going to put that on the engine. And when we start it up, we've got a fighting chance of getting oil pressure very quickly. So there's the oil pump fitted and the filter is screwed on. You just do it hand tight. You don't have to tighten it too much. They're happy when you just turn them hand tight. So I need to put in the new oil sending unit over there. And then I'm gonna keep that like that. I'm not gonna make a blanking cap now in case my client wants to use his old pump. And I'm also not gonna fit the distributor now, because whoever buys this engine might want to put an electronic distributor in, and then I'll do that for them. So for now, that's the engine done. Obviously 4 spark plugs, and I'm gonna put in a new temperature sending unit. But other than that, this engine is done. And there you have it. A14 done. I'll start it, but I'll start it in a different video. But that's basically how I rebuild the engine. Remember, lots and lots and lots of oil. Make sure you use a good engineering company that get your bearing and piston clearances and stuff proper. Use good parts. I didn't use any Nissan parts. Last time I found out Nissan only had 1 oil pump left, and that was over a year ago. That's in the whole of South Africa. So, but use decent quality aftermarket parts, nothing wrong with it. And when you put it together, use lots of oil, clean oil, and work clean. Your hands and your cloths and everything must be clean. And follow your torque settings. Do everything to your torque settings. Do the timing proper, and you'll have a decent engine. Anyway, I hope this helps someone. Be safe out there.